Good day to you, and welcome to the live program of the Voice of Freedom. Today, we do have a very special guest, and he has a lot of information that you and I need to hear. And he's a gentleman that is a researcher He just doesn't have the name of being a researcher, but he's a man that has a fantastic background of researching over a good many years. So I'm going to let my co-host, Michael, introduce him to you, and we're going to be in for some real informative programs. Okay? Michael, why don't you introduce our guest?
Well, we have a very, very knowledgeable man here today before you who's going to speak on the banking and some of the problems we have and explain it to you. His name is Mickey Paletta, and with that, I'll let him take off and run with this.
Hi, guys. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Go ahead.
Well, let's get down to business.
Okay.
My co-host.
So what would you like me to answer
my
first?
co-host,
Do you have any
Michael,
questions, Michael?
I asked him a question.
Okay.
And it created a lot of, no, that can't be right.
Okay.
I asked him, how did America get into the kind of mess it's in today? How would you answer that?
Well, Jim.
He's thinking, do you hear the cobwebs being removed from his brain?
Well, Jim, what I got to say is that I don't believe that can be answered in one short radio show such as this. I believe that has occurred because of the American people has been asleep, and I believe that this is a conspiracy that goes back, I would believe, since the beginning of time. But let's just take it back to the year of 1776 when the Illuminati was formed. I really believe that the problem that we have to understand is that we have to understand that the banking system and that the Federal Reserve is not part of the American government. What the Federal Reserve is, that everybody must understand this, it is a private profit-seeking tax-exempt corporation that is literally owned and controlled by the Rothschilds and by the Rockefellers and the super rich that actually control world events.
No, I'm going to stop you right there.
Okay.
Because people have heard that, but is there any proof to back that up?
Well,
now, you've done a lot of researching over the years.
Yeah, what I've
done
a good
many
is
years.
This.
I know you've been at a very deep research program for 25 years or more, and your what do we say? The pile where you've been keeping your research is a pretty big pile. And you have dealt only with facts. You don't go by rumors.
Right.
You got to have facts to prove it, because of the type of work you do. You have to have solid proof. So how do you get into that?
Yeah, years ago I wanted to more or less master it all, and I was very, very naive, and I believed that one man I could figure all this out. So I spent some of my time in the income tax and some of my time the abortion issue, and then the Second Amendment and the Fifth Amendment and the 10th Amendment and 14th Amendment. But then I started to realize that's not the issues at hand. What the issue is at hand is that we have a banking system that was built, and that with the defects that are built in under the Federal Reserve, this system is designed to bring down our government. This system is devised to cause the utter collapse of our American system of government, because no government and no one can survive if your debt just keeps on growing every single day. Before the reserve was formed, Jim, in 1913, do you know that our income taxes that the people paid was less than $200 million a year? That's corporate, that's everything. Now it's up into the trillions, and there's no way that within the next 5 years, there's no way this government is going to survive. And what it is that no government can go out and borrow its own money and pay these crooked bankers that interest for lending our government and people like you and I our own money. It's impossible. You can never get out of debt. It's impossible. So what the secret is let the government create money and not lend it, and let the banks loan money and not create it. And that would be a real good start in straightening out our country. And the American people, that you asked me, how did we get into it? I believe that the American people, they're as much to blame as anybody else, because our founding guys like Madison and Jefferson said it's up to you to keep this government straight. Mm-hmm. And we haven't done a very, very good job because of our own greed and our hungry and our lust and all of the, well, we're only human. So we have defects. And as long as we could buy our kids shoes and we got a nice car, we got gallons worth of gas that we can drive around the block, that's as far as it goes. And people, we have to understand that this is your country just as much it is mine. And for me to go on a radio show such as this, and I'm not a radical like some people
yes.
Have classified me as, because I'm very, very proud of this country. I'm very, very proud of what we have done. And what's wrong about it is that I believed in the American dream. But when you get involved and when you study that American dream, believe me, there is no American dream. What it is, the American nightmare. This government, and I don't say this lightly, I'm embarrassed to go down this road, but it's the truth. That I believe that this system that we presently have is far worse than Hitler's, Mao Zedong, and Stalin's combined. This government is the worst government, I think, in the history of the world. Because you ask people, and they say, oh yeah, we're free, that we could do this, we could do that. But let's face it, if the bankers control the money supply, and I don't care if we go out there and create the finest laws known to man, and as long as banks control the amount of currency through the inflationary contraction, you can never be free as long as you have a central bank. It's the opposite of what this country is founded on, Jim. You can't have them both.
So in other words, Congress has resigned their constitutional directive. They are supposed to handle the money.
Well, what you got to do, folks, is everybody out there, what I say is this. Don't believe a word I say. I mean, I'm asking you to go out and research this and prove it for yourself. And if Now, what you got to do is just look at the Constitution of the United States and its paragraph 185 clause. And Jim, it makes it very clear that only Congress shall coin and regulate the value of money. What I don't understand is, why is a private profit-seeking tax-exempt corporation that is listed on Ward's Business Directory and Dun & Bradstreet as private profit-seeking corporations, and everybody thinks they're part of the American government? That if they are, then why isn't the Department of State listed? People, it's real simple. The Federal Reserve is not part of our government. It's a private corporation that was formed just for their own financial gain, and they are actually destroying the greatest country in the history of the world. And it's we the people that we must share this blame, because we have allowed them to do this to us. There's no other fault, Jim. It's our own fault for allowing them to do it to us.
Well, it would seem to me it is a plan that was deliberately planned ahead of time. Why would they call it the Federal Reserve? Would that not be because they want to implant in we the people's minds it's part of federal government?
Jim, that's exactly right. And you know what really irks me? And you pick up the Patriot News and the Sharon Herald and the Youngstown Vindicator, and when there's something to do about the Federal Reserve, they always say the Fed lowers interest rate. And being now that the people out there, and I hate to go down this road, but it's your own fault, that does not relate in any way to the federal government. When you hear the Fed, it's the private profit-seeking tax-exempt corporation that is literally, I mean, I hate to use this word on the show, but they're screwing us every day of our lives.
Wow.
Corrupt to the core, huh? That's the real problem.
And I'm also going to make this very, very clear now. And I don't care who it is, Harry Reid, Nancy Pelosi, and the one guy that I really laugh about is this John McCain. Spent, 5-7 years in the Vietnam War camp. And when his own people that served with him said that he was a traitor then. And Mr. McCain, you're a traitor to this day when you allow the Federal Reserve to rob us of our money. And Jim, there's like this. I bet that we have paid the Federal Reserve more interest in just 1 or 2 short years that we could have paid off the entire national debt of these United States.
That's kind of shocking, isn't it?
Well, yeah, and all you people that, if you don't believe me, that I'm saying to me or to yourself, prove me wrong, and believe me, start to research this, and you're going to find out that we are right. And when you hear this, the Youngstown Vindicator and Harrisburg newspaper, and both of them are just as phony as they come. The total debt of the United States is now something like $16.5 trillion.
Mm-hmm.
And people, if you believe this, man, I got some snow cones, like in Cuba, that I want to sell you.
It's much more than that, is it?
Well, the total aggregate debt, based on my research, that the total aggregate debt now, when I use the term aggregate, I mean a federal government debt, state government's debt, city debt, people's debt, corporations' debt. This is going to be shocking. It's over $190 trillion.
How much?
190, Jim.
190
trillion.
trillion?
Yes.
T is in In Tom?
In Tom. Yeah.
Whoa! Wow!
And based upon now the Federal Reserve's own stats.
What do you think of that, Michael?
Yeah, outrageous.
Yeah. Now, too, you want to hear something really outrageous, Michael? Is that the Federal Reserve states there's only $1 trillion in currency in circulation.
Now, how can
So
that be?
you don't have to be a mental giant to figure that out. But how in the heck do you pay 190 with only one? It's impossible. So what the government does, guys, is they go out and they borrow more money, and they just borrow enough just to pay their bankers interest on the debt last month, and then they go out and they have to borrow money next week just to pay this day's interest, and the debt constantly grows and grows and grows. Now, do you want to hear a shocking fact? Is that we are still paying interest on bonds that were created during Lincoln's terms to fight the Civil War, and that was in 1861, 1862, 3, 4, and 5. Jim, we're still paying interest on some of those bonds that the government created and sold them to the bank.
That's absolutely crazy.
Well, what you're saying though is then that the country is actually run by the Federal Reserve. The United States government has to kneel before the bank every day to borrow money to keep its doors open. Now, how can that be? How can we be a free society when we got to kneel before the bank? It sounds to me like government's nothing more but smoke and mirrors so American people think they got some say in something, and they don't. It's a whore government's your worst problem, people. Wake up to that.
Well, I did an article here now with Congressman Trafficant that we collaborated on, and it was in the American Free Press, and I think it was very, very well done, right, Jim? He's very good at that. And what it comes down to is people. We do not have the American government the way we are taught in our schools. We wrote an article on the de facto government is what we currently have. We no longer have the government that you and I went to school and that we were taught. Keep this in mind. Is what we have is a United States corporate fictional government, and it's not the government of what Lincoln said, of and by and for the people. What is for is the government of the bankers, by their bankers, and for the bankers. And believe me, if we do not stop this corruption and all of this abuse, Jim, with the little bit of freedoms that we presently have, which are not really freedoms at all, we're going to end up with nothing. And guess what? It's our own fault.
And we're just about there now, are we not?
Oh, yeah, Jim, there's no doubt. You see, and I go out now, I do my talks all over the United States, and what I say is that when we are more concerned with me and I versus us and we, that's where we are today, and that's not the way it's supposed to be. If we're not concerned with our neighbor losing her house and their kids living in the streets, and what we say is, all he's got to do is go out and get a job and pay for his house like I'm doing. But what the people don't understand is economic freedom does not exist as long as you have a central bank pulling the strings and inflating and contracting the money supply. Now, 7 years ago, right, we had a great big downturn. People were losing their jobs by the hundreds of thousands every day. And people, You and I just sat back and allowed these bankers to contract the money supply, and yet we say that is so ridiculous. And the fact of the matter is, when we have a recession, there's one thing that's missing. That's the total supply of money has just been shrunk by the banks, not because of some formula that they live by. It's only by Wall Street's and a few guys' whim that live in London and the New York Manhattan homes that say, I think it's about time that we rape the people once again and increase our profits. So what we're going to do is we're going to contract the money supply, throwing all those peons out of work, or the goyams, like I like to say, out of a job, throw them in the street, and then the bankers really reap the awards by stealing our homes.
Well, I see our time is gone, but we'll have you back for another program here very shortly.
Okay, well,
Am I
guys,
reading
thank
that
you very,
correctly?
very much.
No. We've got 10 minutes.
Okay.
Oh, we got another 10 minutes. Hey, good.
No, I
We
forgot
got 10 minutes
what I was
more.
gonna
Okay.
No,
So you're
no,
telling
what
us-
was the last thing that I said?
You were telling
No, I was
us.
going to hit on something real good.
Okay.
Let me think.
Well, what you're saying is the entire, by the banks controlling the entire money supply, what they're doing is forcing the United States into some so-called bankruptcy, and they have the welfare system set up just to take care of the people, which is now reliant on the government, and they're creating a communist country here, a communist state. It's like what it says in the Bible. In Revelations, it says there will be a world government, which is what they're trying to create. You won't buy, sell, eat, and do business unless you do it with a beast system. And that's what they're bringing on. And they're setting it up through the banks. Absolute, total control from birth to the grave.
Well, Michael, that's exactly right. And what I say is this. For us people to sit back and allow a few privileged men to rob and steal our homes every day of our lives for their own gain is, I think, that the blame rests upon us. And as long as we allow this, nothing can or will ever change. We have to understand is that when the banks make loans, and this is going to be a shock to all of you, but the banks do not lend money. The banks have no money. So people, listen close, and we are the lenders, and the banks, they're the borrowers. So when you go in, people, and when you get a loan, it's the same thing as you walking into a bank and saying, I have a $5 bill and I want you to give me an exchange or cash my $5 bill for 5 $1 bills. Most people know, right, because we're so smart, that that's not a lane. That's an even exchange.
Mm-hmm.
But listen to me close. That example is no different than when you go into a bank with a promissory note and give the bank the promissory note, which is the same equivalent of giving that banker the face amount of that promissory note in cash, and then the bank is going to deposit that into the bank's assets account, proving that they owe you because they have to credit the bank's demand deposit account for the amount of the promissory note, and the funds that are pulled out of there are pulled out from your account, proving that we are the lenders and the banks are the borrowers. And that is why our government is $190 trillion in debt. And,
Whoa.
Sounds like we need to be suing the banks.
Well, I think we better be doing a lot more than suing the banks, Michael. I mean, I think the time's at hand.
For revolution.
I'm getting calls every day. Can you come here and speak? I heard you, and I listened to Jim and Michael the other day on their show. And is this true? People, what I'm saying is, yes, it is true. And I'm asking you is to study and study. And years ago, I'm a JFK buff, Jim. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And this is the truth. Now, I'm sitting in Jean Hill's house. And Jean Hill is the lady in red in the JFK death. And I'm sitting there, and I asked her, I said, Jean, tell me who killed him. And Jean looked at me, and the biggest tears ran down her face. She said to me, Mickey, you probably have read 50 books on this, and you've been studying this for years. You ought to tell me who killed him. I said, Jean, don't play with me. Tell me who killed JFK. She looked at me, and believe me, man, with the biggest tears coming down her face, she said, study international banking interest. And if you do that and study that you can figure out what's going on behind the world scene. And it's not the way it appears to be. And you know, Jim, I spent the next year that she just can't be right. So I'm going to just say that, Jean, I proved you wrong. And you know, I studied for a year in my downstairs, and I hardly left. And I read just about every book that I can get my hands on. And then that ended up with over 500 books. And you know that I proved her wrong. And here I am now today looking at. I don't believe a damn word that I read in the New York Times, the Harrisburg Patriot News, especially Mr. Kirkpatrick, the editor, and the Sharon Herald, and all of them, because they're all controlled by this conspiracy, and you know, comprises not just the banks people, but the American bar. They're behind this too, because they have now gained the control of our courts, and our courts are nothing but indirect debt collectors. And I was shocked to this. Do you know that the Pennsylvania courts, that they formed corporations? Our courts, Jim, now they were incorporated in 1776. So what about this government of the people, by the people, and for the people? Wake up. It's the government of the bankers, by the bankers, and for the bankers. Wake up. Put the Coke down. Put the potato chips down. Get off the couch and get to work.
Amen. Well, thank you for being with us today. We want to run some more programs with you because you have a lot of factual knowledge. And so our guests will be back. And where's my co-sponsor?
Yeah. We're done.
Okay.
Well, there's one thing now. Did my union rep, did he call in yet?